Okay, so does that make sense to everybody? So there are specific things that are happening here. And it might seem like a minor, minor things we're talking about. We're talking about life versus death. I mean, it's death for the cell if the ice crystal forms. The sample is going to be dead. And then some of the things that are frozen, if they're reproductive cells, well then that's, that human is not going to be born, because that material was damaged. So, so we're taking our cryo vials and putting them into these cryo chambers or storage tanks. We're putting these things into a minus 80 degrees centigrade freezer. And then long term though, minus 80 degrees centigrade is not low enough. That's still, at the level where there's a little bit of molecular wiggling going around. Have you ever seen Brownian motion? If you're at high magnification in a microscope, stuff seems like it's vibrating. Have you ever seen that? It's fascinating. I mean, it really says that the whole world, like our physical realm, molecules are bouncing. And you can see evidence of that just with a light microscope. And that's amazing. So during freezing, minus 80 degrees, things are still bouncing around a little bit, minus 80 degrees. And so there's a little bit of chemistry that's possible, which means that things are kind of drifting in a bad way. Because at minus 80 degrees, you don't have life, per se. It's not warm enough for the biochemical reactions to occur as they would during the life process. But you've got some sort of side reactions going on, which could be construed as damage. So at minus 80 degrees, there's accumulating damage, potentially. So the way we can get around that is we can use liquid nitrogen. So yeah, have you guys seen the liquid nitrogen tank? I'm going to abbreviate liquid LQ, liquid and nitrogen N2, liquid nitrogen. So this is very specific too. And the temperature that liquid nitrogen is at it boils at minus 196 degrees centigrade. So that's the warmest it can be and still be liquid. So how cold is it actually? It's hovering around there. It's constantly sublimating and steam is coming off of it. So if we're going to go to the liquid nitrogen tank today. Take the top off, you're going to see this smoke coming out of there. Okay, and that's because the liquid nitrogen is boiling because the air in the room is so much warmer. It's like, it's at such a low temperature, it looks like fire to the liquid nitrogen. It's like, wow, it's really hot out there. So it is sublimating from liquid. Actually, that would be sublimation. But it's undergoing a rapid phase transition from liquid to gas. So minus 196 degrees centigrade. What is that Fahrenheit, by the way? I mean, you guys are all used to the Fahrenheit. How many degrees is that? Did you guess? So it's minus 321 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the temperature inside the tank. Sounds cold. It is cold. What happens if you put your finger in liquid nitrogen?
It'll freeze.
It'll freeze, for sure. And then can you thaw it out?
No.
No?
I mean, it will thaw, but
Yeah.
it's gonna be all nerves and stuff on your feet. Right?
Yeah.
Across the body.
Yeah. It's going to kill your finger, right? If you put your finger, look, it's liquid nitrogen. We're doing self-freezing, so I think, let's see what happens if I put my finger in there. Oops. You're going to be missing the finger, and there's nothing they can do to bring it back. It's like if you sever your finger, we can actually sew it back on, and that happens pretty frequently. I've talked to quite a few people that have had accidents, and they've sewn the finger back on, and it's still good. But you put your finger in liquid nitrogen, that finger's gone. There's going to be cell damage in the finger. There's millions and millions of cells in that finger, and they're all going to burst because there's nothing protecting them from the ice crystal formation thing and the solutes forming, clumping together as the ice forms. So this is pretty dangerous stuff, liquid nitrogen. Fortunately, it has I think what they describe as a low specific heat. So like if you spill some, it doesn't instantly freeze everything. So you're going to see when we go to the liquid nitrogen tank, we pull out one of these, we call a cane. It's got a handle. We pull out this thing, and it's a metal metal rack that contains a bunch of boxes. And there's going to be liquid nitrogen spilling all over the place. Pretty scary. You certainly wouldn't want to be in open-toed shoes, you know, some sort of sandal or something, and be pulling this liquid nitrogen tank. Because it's true that if, you know, if a fair amount gets on you, it will kill. And it's the most similar to a burn. So, you know, like it would be similar to me taking a torch and burning you know, with that flame, because that's going to kill the cells, and touching liquid nitrogen will kill the cells. In a doctor's office, what is liquid nitrogen used for? I mean, one of the things that they can do, what's a positive thing you can do? If you wanted to kill something, like what kind of thing would you want to kill? In small amounts in your body. A wart. Yeah, that's a classic one. You know, and there's a little growth, little benign growths and things like that, weird things that people get. So you go to a dermatologist's office, or even sometimes a general practitioner, and they have some liquid nitrogen there, and they have a little Q-tip swab or whatever, right? And they just dab it. And when that stuff touches, it's going to kill whatever's there. So all those cells are going to be gone. And it's a little bit more palatable than coming out with a flame, or, you know, taking a branding iron and singeing you or whatever. So, but it will break open the cells and kill them all. So it is used medically. Okay, so then, you know, other things to be aware of, like when you're handling liquid nitrogen, besides the open-toed shoes, you know, longer pants are a good idea, like shorts are less good of an idea, because if we're lifting up the thing, and this is spilling, and you've got a bare leg, and liquid nitrogen goes like flowing down your leg, you know, you're probably going to get burned. So that's something else. Goggles are a good idea. Now, this is the one thing where, you know, people that are actually looking at the cryovials, I like them to have glasses on. Why do you think that is? Well, what happens is, the vial is a closed container, right? And an explosion is when you have a force that's contained, and the force needs to get out, and it will suddenly explode. So the cryovial, you know, some sort of plastic vial, something like that. It's got a cap on the top. And you have your cell sample suspended in the cryoprotectant here. And you're taking it out of the liquid nitrogen. Well, if some liquid nitrogen gets into this cryovial, this is a cap. So potentially a little bit of the stuff could get in there. And if it gets in there, once you take it out of liquid nitrogen, it's going to heat up. And then it's going to go from liquid phase to gas phase. And then, as we know from our Coke bottle example, right, when things undergo phase transitions, they expand. You know, when you go from solid to liquid, you expand. When you go from liquid to gas, you expand. So when you go from liquid nitrogen, liquid to gas, it expands rapidly. And it's contained in this little plastic vial. Well, you're going to get an explosion. Right? So it's you know, it's not made out of metal, but it's scrap plastic. Little chunks of plastic are going to go flying everywhere. It's going to go pop, but like sort of a firecracker sound, like, you know, boom, crack, and little, you know, pieces of plastic go everywhere. So if you're looking at it, you know, it can go into your eye and blind you. It's pretty serious. You know, I used to think that actually, you know, doing tissue culture stuff was the safest thing I could imagine doing. You know, compared to, you know, police, firemen, all this other stuff. You know, their heroes are out there doing all this stuff. You know, sitting in a tissue culture hood, I mean, come on. You know, that seems pretty safe. But actually, I was talking with a guy at a science meeting, and he said he had a terrible accident in the tissue culture hood. And I was like, oh, you know, what happened? Did the flask flip over or something? Did you spill some medium or what? You know? And he said that there's a gas line in these hoods. So one of the things that they were always doing is running the gas line to like some kind of Bunsen burner, or more often what we call a tap burner, where you just tap it and the flame shoots up, and you use that to sterilize instruments and stuff. You have just a momentary flame, and because the gas line is connected to that, you know, if you forget to close the gas line completely,
then gas is filling this tissue culture hood. It's a nice enclosed container when you're turning it off, so there's no flow, and you've got gas, natural gas building up in there. You go in the next morning and you have your little spark lighter or whatever, you know, so a little spark hits it, boom, explodes. So I mean, he had like second and third degree burns on his face. It was completely burned, and he was hospitalized for months with that. So I tend to not use the gas burner. You know, I have a little handheld torch thing that I always use, and even with that, I actually burned my hand with a torch, which was painful. So I mean, you have to respect the fire thing in tissue culture. But anyway, you need to respect this liquid nitrogen stuff. You know, liquid nitrogen is, you know, it will burn you. It kills everything it touches. So how does this make sense? So we're dealing with a cell sample, and we're going to dunk it in the liquid nitrogen eventually. So it's, how does that not kill it? But if you put your finger in there, it's completely dead, and there's nothing it can do to bring it back. Well, it's all the cryoprotectant. It's just this DMSO. It's DMSO plus something that's kind of viscous. So the other thing that we use for viscosity is we use FBS, which is serum, fetal bovine serum. So it's blood serum. It's pretty viscous stuff, lots of proteins dissolved there. So that's something we can use. Other things can be used: glycerol, methyl cellulose, polyvinyl rhodine. You know, so these are viscous substances, so that helps too. Nonetheless, the DMSO seems to be one of the best, and you know, the viscosity can be provided by this FBS, so that's a lot of what we use, and that's what you'll be using today. So if you forget the cryoprotectant, it's not going to work. The cells will be completely, well, almost completely dead. I deal with one cell that survives out of the 10 million you put in there. I don't know. But, you know, so there's two things that you really needed. You needed the control rate freezing. That was the miracle, right? This magical 1 degree centigrade per minute. That's important. And this cryoprotectant mix, that's important. So with those two things, life. Without either one, death. Pretty spectacular. There's also other technologies out there. There's vitrification, where, you know, if you manage to immediately freeze something incredibly quickly, that it might survive. So the phase transition, they talk about an amorphous ice forming. It's a syrupy solution, a solid liquid. So if a liquid freezes fast enough, and how fast is fast? You need like a megakelvins per second. I don't know how you get that, but I guess there's equipment that allows you to do that. I've tried taking biological samples and dipping them directly into liquid nitrogen, and that does not work at all. I mean, the stuff that we've tested, zero viability after doing that. So just like your finger going in there, if we take some tissue, biopsy tissue, and put it in liquid nitrogen, nothing. If we take cells, dip them right into liquid nitrogen, dead, completely dead. Everything's completely dead. So the vitrification thing, without the controlled rate freezer, some sort of controlled rate freezing thing, everything dies. And I'm interested in this technology too, so I have my own version of cryogenic stuff. So there's one thing that's kind of interesting is this, what they call eutectic point. You know, water drops in temperature, and then at a certain point, as it's undergoing a phase transition, it rapidly increases in temperature, and then it goes back down. So that inflection point is called the eutectic. And you know, regulating the eutectic might have some benefit. And also, you know, ways of preparing cells with cryoprotectants and things that can vary too. That mixture can vary. So there's ways to optimize it. So I've worked on that some, and we get better results than what I've seen from other labs. So it's kind of encouraging. So I tend to think that, you know, we actually never did it full time. So I tend to think it's, you know, there's room there for dedicated research people, and I think it's a worthwhile cause. Okay, so I'm about to hand out the quiz. So we talked about, just to review, we talked about, organ transplant, and the fact that, if there's a donor organ, they cool it to 4 degrees, but they don't freeze it. So the 4 degrees centigrade is wet ice, right? So the water is not actually freezing. So that's what they do currently for organ transplants. And there's a lot of reasons why cooling is beneficial. If a child falls through the ice, you've seen this thing. There was a bunch of boys playing ice hockey, and then suddenly the ice cracks, and one of the kids ends up submerged with the water. They can't find him. It's like floating underneath the ice. They pull him out like 2 hours later. It's like, well, he drowned, right? This kid's dead. It's like, no, because he's at 4 degrees, so he's in the water phase, right? And water stays at about, that eutectic point, you have to go below 0 first to get the heating. So, there's no phase transition that occurred, but the body is cool. So they pull the kid out. The kid's still alive. Hasn't been breathing for 2 hours, and they can revive the person. That's pretty amazing. So, there's a lot of benefits to going to 4 degrees, so that's why they do it. But it's still, 24 hours is kind of the maximum. 24, maybe some people say you can go 48 if you've got everything else right. Some special additives. There's the Biotyne company works with some of these blood extenders and ways of adding some compounds to blood where it can be cooled and kept longer. So that technology is kind of out there too, and that all leads to products. Blood storage banks, keeping the blood cooled 4 degrees. But then once you get into freezing, there's a problem, right, with the ice crystals and the solutes. Okay, good. So I decided that we would take this quiz now as opposed to giving it to you while you're in the lab. And I think, while you're in the lab, everybody's at a different point and we're moving stuff around. It's more difficult to do that. So we're just going to do this. These are all multiple choice questions. It's just one page, 2 sides to the page. There isn't a blank at the top, so just please remember to write your name on the top, because I need to know who you are. And I think it's pretty straightforward, but I also think, this is a way for you to be evaluated fairly. I don't want to have any bias on anybody's, style. You don't need to be, extroverted or, any of these other things in order to do well in this class. But you do need to know what you're doing, and all the things that we talked about are very specific concepts, and it's not good enough to say a couple of degrees per minute transition. It really has to be pretty precisely what I've described. Okay, so put notes away. We'll pass this out.